Hello, Avatar fans, and welcome to the next episode of the Avatar Online podcast. This is going to be episode 229 of our regular shows, and we're recording this on May 30th, 2021. This is the official podcast for the fan site Avatar The Last Airbender Online.com, and I'm going to be your main host, Morgan Airspeed Prime. Joining me on the podcast is Greg2B from the site.
What's up, everyone?
Excellent. So, we've actually got quite a few pieces of news to talk about, and I'd say at least two or three of these pieces of news are actually quite interesting, and then we've got, I suppose, kind of a bit of a discussion topic at the end. I don't think we're going to go like super in-depth on it, but we'll get to that towards the end. So let's start off with this first piece of news, which was that they, of course, announced that they were going to be doing a live reading for Toph Beifong's Metalbending Academy with some of the voice cast. That has happened. The live stream happened. It's now available to view on Twitch or YouTube. And they had Michaela Murphy, the voice of Toph, Jenny Kwan, the voice of Suki, Jack Desena, the voice of Sokka, and then last minute they sort of added in Phil Lamar, who voices the Earth King, and Olivia Hack, who voices Ty Lee, to also kind of join them. And they also had Faith Erin Hicks and Peter Wortman, who obviously are the creators on the comic. So it was quite a big live stream here in terms of the amount of people that they had on. I did watch it. They did a reading for... It was tough to follow because they put out like a preview that you could follow that they showed off on stream for about like 10 of the pages, but then they did other ones where they like legally, I suppose, couldn't show more of the comic. I'd say they probably ended up doing about 20-30 pages in or around of the book, and it was pretty fun. And then they had like a pretty longish sort of Q&A session afterwards. It was very similar to the sort of stuff they discussed with the Korra voice actors on the previous Turf Wars ones that they did. I enjoyed it for what it was. Again, I think the lack of like them revealing news on these always kind of holds them back a little bit, just because voice actor discussions tend to be kind of very similar in that, like I said, a lot of the questions with the I think that were directed at Faith Erin Hicks and Peter Wortman, as well as the voice actors, were kind of the same as you would typically get. But it's nice that they continue to do these, and they sort of heavily hinted that they will do one for Suki alone, because they have Jenny Kwan on this one, and she seems pretty excited that it's going to be a more kind of emotional book for Suki, and that'll be actually interesting if they commit to doing that. I didn't really hear any teases about any other books or anything like that. There was no hint whatsoever, I think, really at new information. But Greg, what were your thoughts on this? Did you catch any of this live stream or the video on demand?
Yeah, I caught some of the video on demand after the fact, and yeah, it's a fun thing that they're continuing to do, which I think is pretty cool, just with the current state of everything. So the fact that they're able to do this and that they're, willing to do this, just, their time and everything, I think is pretty cool to see. I think, it is, pretty much just as is. So if you're looking forward towards, extra news or anything like that, this isn't really the place where that would sort of come out of. So if that is something, then that's always like a bit of a letdown, I suppose. But no, you can only, I guess, really expect so much. They do have other ones that Dark Horse does where they will do some more comic news ones, although none have really as of yet been, focused on Avatar, since that stuff is still ongoing and however that's being dealt with. But no, I think it's cool, and just the fact that they can get, so many people to coordinate to do this, I think is pretty cool in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think my main takeaway from this is that I would like to see Jack Desena and PJ Byrne on the same live stream at some point, because they seem like the most like fun and kind of like crazy members of the cast and that they had on both of them. So it'd be cool to see the two kind of voice actors for the kind of comedy characters kind of come together for something, but who knows if that'll happen. But yeah, that was that. They gave no information on like the date for the Suki one. Obviously, they're going to give it some time to like actually be released, because like we're still like 2 months away from the book coming out, unfortunately. But I assume they'll do it like in or around like the same timing as this, where like 2-3 months after the book comes out. So or it probably won't be until like October or something like that. Next piece of news kind of came out of nowhere, but very interesting. Nickelodeon launching Avatar: The Last Airbender and SpongeBob SquarePants podcast. So that's the full headline, but for Avatar, it's they're launching an Avatar podcast. Now, interestingly, all of the news and like press releases and stuff like that only mention Avatar: The Last Airbender. But when asked, the hosts for this official Avatar podcast, Janet Varney and Dante Basco, did confirm this also includes Korra. They will be doing Korra as part of it as well. Whereas the Avatar podcast is going to be hosted by two of the voice actors, of course, Korra and Zuko. The SpongeBob SquarePants podcast, which is also official, is just going to be hosted by like fans, which was kind of interesting. But yeah, this was initially announced by EW.com in a surprisingly detail-less article that didn't really give much of the information, including what I felt was the most important piece of information: the like number of episodes and when the first episode is launching. For some reason, they didn't have that, even though very clearly their article was formed from the press release, which, if you find the press release on one of the other websites, actually has so much more information about it. Yeah, the details here is just, they talk about, the podcast market is like really important and like they wanted to do something with this. But here's the details. It's called Avatar: Braving the Elements. It says it's going to be 40 episodes and it's going to premiere on Tuesday, June 22nd, 2021. And the description says, enter the amazing world of Avatar through the official companion podcast from Nickelodeon. Join hosts Janet Varney, the voice of Korra, and Dante Basco, the voice of Zuko, each week as they rewatch every episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender and break down key themes, notable battles, and behind-the-scenes trivia. Special guests from the cast members to the producers join them to explore elements of the Avatar verse, including the origins of the story and how the Avatar was brought to life. So that's pretty cool. And then, is there any extra information here? No, I don't think really. Obviously, like I said, afterwards people were like, why does it only mention Avatar? But they're also doing Korra. So across the 40 episodes that there are going to be of this thing, they will cover all of Avatar and all of Korra, meaning I guess they have to cover about 2 or 3 episodes of the show per podcast to do that. So we'll see exactly how that goes. And there's only just over 3 weeks away from the release of the first episode, so we don't have too long to wait. But Greg, what are your thoughts on this official podcast hosted by two of the more notable voice actors here? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think the idea of them doing this, just building up the hype and continuing everything, I think it's definitely a cool thing to do, and to have, both of them do this who, have done, other speaking engagements, and, Janet Varney has her own podcast, and Dante does a lot of stuff as well. So, it seems like if you were to get two people who are still, pretty involved with everything and that, the fans know and everything like that, like these seem like the two best people that I could think of, at least, to actually do this. So no, I think it's cool. It sounds like it should be fun. I mean, I wouldn't, along the lines of other things that are coming out now, I wouldn't really expect any sort of like exclusives or anything like super behind the scenes of stuff that's, still in development or still coming out, just because, this is, they're still pretty far out as far as that considers. And, depending on, the amount of, weeks that they have in the episodes that they say they're going to do now, which who knows, that might actually change. It's only going to be going so long, but, definitely it seems fun. I'll definitely check it out just to, hear their opinions. I mean, I think, with it being official, it might have been cooler if they could have done something a bit more in depth, but we're not really quite there yet.
Mm-hmm. The only other thing to add to this is that Mike DiMartino, of course, franchise co-creator, did post about this, and he just says that it's going to be hosted by Janet Varney, Dante Basco. It's part rewatch, part interview, part deep dive into the series, and Brian and I might even drop in once in a while. Now, I think other stuff that they've said suggests that a lot of this has been sort of pre-recorded already, so it's not that like it's starting with an episode they only recorded very recently and they're going forward. So this has probably been something that's been in place for months now. So it will be interesting to see, like, if Mike and Brian are on the first episode, which I think will be a good thing to do to just draw people in, that you have the obvious two people on the first episode. It would be interesting to note like when that was recorded, and that I'm guessing that one might be like pre-Avatar Studios. But if they get them back on, because Mike and Brian are suggesting they've been on multiple, it would be interesting if they do say anything after the Avatar Studios news is public, if they've said anything. But yeah, I don't really expect it to be news like that until we get to maybe like much further down the line. But we'll see how it all goes. As for, I suppose, the structure and what they're planning to do, it is interesting. Like, okay, part interview, and I like the fact that they're getting, guests on. For me, of course, I think I'm going to be much more interested to see the kind of the writers come on, to see Mike and Brian come on, to see like a Tim Hedrick come on, that sort of thing. The voice actors, again, will be fun, especially if they really kind of theme it up in the right way, and they have like, this is 201, like Azula's big sort of debut episode, and they get Great Lyle on, like that'd be cool if they really do it that way. But I think what I'm actually the most interested in is to just see the two voice actors, how they go about doing a sort of rewatch discussion, because I don't usually associate the voice actors with being the ones to do like particularly like in-depth analysis of the series itself, in that like they'll talk about their own characters, their favorite episodes to like voice act during, and maybe their favorite episode for that character. But I'm interested to see them get to like, say, The Great Divide, and just see what the two of them have to say about it, and like how they approach it, given that like it's official for Nickelodeon, so they're gonna, I suppose, be relatively kind to the series, and that sort of thing. Like I want to see how that actually works, because like them talking about, okay, themes make sense, but like Janet Varney and Dante Basco discussing the battles of Avatar, that could work. But what are your thoughts on that? How in depth do you think the rewatch part of this is going to be?
Yeah, that is a good question. I mean, I wonder how long, each one actually is, because that'll determine a lot of, just the time that they have in terms of just breaking things down, doing themes, doing interviews, when they have guests on. Is it the standard, like 30 or an hour long, or, can they go even longer, since it is podcast format where, like some of ours can be like, hours long or anything like that. So I think that'll be a good indication of how in depth they're actually going to go into it, especially if we're, with it being, at least as of now, 40 episodes total, and breaking down how many episodes per each one they're going to do. I mean, it's just, inherently it's going to limit things. But I think the idea of them doing this from, their perspective, having worked on this show, there's definitely, a certain particular value that can be placed on that from, just them, working in it, or just being in the industry in general, and just, taking, how it relates to them directly. I mean, I know Janet has done, a couple different, talks with other people on her own podcast where she's gotten, more in depth with, some of the episodes, and just terms of how it relates to like her personally and characters and stuff. So I think that might be actually interesting to see, if they do go more along those routes. And yeah, if they do talk anything about, sort of the battles and sort of the techniques and stuff like that, I think that could definitely be really interesting just to see from, their perspective. I think, the more perspectives you can get on things is always a good thing in the end. So I'm definitely open to see how it goes.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm wondering when they'll announce like some details about the first episode, because I assume they'll like really hype up ahead of June 22nd that like first episode is June 22nd. Here's the first guest, or maybe the first episode is just the two of them on their own. Who knows? But yeah, that's not too far away, so that's pretty exciting. Next up, we have out of nowhere, but something we've been honestly waiting for a while. McFarlane Toys announced ages ago that they got the license for Avatar and Korra. While we have no pictures of any of this stuff, some listings have gone up for McFarlane Avatar The Last Airbender merchandise, specifically some figures. No Korra stuff just yet, but McFarlane is like currently in the middle of announcing like what looks like their next month's worth of products for like all of their lines. So this wasn't as such like news in a way, in that like I'm pretty sure like I actually like found this stuff, like I'm kind of like the source of it in a way, because I just saw that like, oh, like Toy Arc is listing like all this DC stuff from McFarlane. I'll just check Avatar, and one of the websites happened to have this stuff. So I'll just go through it in order. I'll just read out sort of all the listings that there are, and then we'll kind of go through and analyze it. So the first one up here is Avatar The Last Airbender 12-inch action figure deluxe, Aang. Pre-order ships September 2021. I don't think there's any details about this. Yes, just that it is from McFarlane. This is a 12-inch figure, and it's going to be Aang, $40. And if you look at McFarlane's lineup, their larger scale figures like this are usually statues. So this is more like a statue similar to the Diamond Select statues. This won't be an action figure as such. Next up, Avatar The Last Airbender 7-inch action figure Wave 1, Aang, again September 2021. And then similarly 7-inch action figure Wave 1, Zuko. And that's it for the 7-inch Wave 1. Just 2 figures in the wave, Aang and Zuko, and we don't know which book version it is or anything like that. So it's literally just the name of the character, what size classes they're doing, and so on. Next, Avatar The Last Airbender 7-inch action figure Basic Creature, Appa. September 2021, $24.99 as well, like the other 7-inch figures, but that's a whole separate kind of listing. There is only one Basic Creature, but we are getting an Appa figure, so that's kind of interesting. Next we have Avatar The Last Airbender 5-inch action figure Basic Combo Pack, Aang with Glider. So this is like a deluxe 5-inch figure that it's Aang with like a big accessory, the glider. That's $16.99. Then we have Avatar The Last Airbender Book 1 Water 5-inch action figure Wave 1. There's going to be Katara, Sokka, Aang, and Prince Zuko, a set of 4 for the 5-inch scale figures. And they're all $13.99 each. So that's the full lineup. So we're getting 5-inch basic figures, 4 of them. Typical what I suppose we expect from a Diamond Select or McFarlane typically. 7-inch figures, 1 wave, 2 figures. There's also going to be a 7-inch creature scale that right now includes Appa, and then an Aang statue at 12 inches. So it's a pretty nice lineup of different sort of size kind of classes here. Greg, what are your thoughts on the McFarlane details so far?
Yeah, I like that we have so many options. I mean, that really seems like a good way about going about it. I mean, I think there might, I mean, there's always, more that they can do. And I'm sure if this is just the beginning that, we'll have like a ton of these. But just from the initial product listings, I like how they have the different ones laid out, how we know that some are, at least according to what we've seen from them in the past, more their sort of statue figures versus the ones that are more posable versus the ones that are more, just sort of your standard type of figures. So I think it's cool to see that what they're planning on doing. As always, we wish that we had, the pictures ahead of time to actually see them. I think it's also cool to see that there are some sets or some combos that they're doing with these as well. So maybe that might be, something for people who are interested in just, getting them all right up in the beginning. I think that's a cool thing to see as well. So, I'm really curious to see how these actually look out, since I know a lot of fans, myself including, are thinking that these are probably going to be the better looking ones out of the ones we've seen so far, although we still have to wait to see on that. But no, I think just seeing this sort of layout, I think is somewhat hopeful for what they're actually going to be doing, at least in the future.
Yeah, I definitely like that they're doing a 5-inch line and a 7-inch line. Just I suppose for people who don't really care about like having like super crazy articulated figures and just want a figure, and they're going to be like cheaper, still sculpted well because it's McFarlane, and like bigger waves. I also like on the 5-inch scale that they're kind of specifically listing it as like this is a book 1 water wave, I suppose. So that sort of confirms to us it's going to be book 1 Zuko, book 1 Aang, book 1 Sokka, book 1 Katara. So that's nice. And then I guess they'll do a book 2. I guess wave 2 would make sense to be, Azula, Toph. But yeah, I actually do really like that they're doing the creatures figures as well. The way they have it listed, obviously, I suppose they have to do it that way to fit the Appa, but I like that it opens up the opportunity for other figures as well, that we might see a dragon, a badger mole, and so on. And then yeah, they're doing statues as well. But what are your thoughts on the creatures? Do you think they'll do more than just Appa?
I really hope so. I think the fact that they even, have it laid out like that, which I don't know if we've seen it done like that before in the sort of more figure type stuff. I know there are, other ones that we've seen where we've gotten like Appa and stuff, or even Momo like attached to Aang. But the fact that that's sort of like its own individual figure, I think it's definitely pretty cool. I'm really curious to see how that works in like size relation to the other characters that are also 7-inch scale, or will it work better with like the 5-inch scale ones? I don't know how that's going to work if you can like set them all up to work with each other. But I'm really curious to see how that goes. I think that might be a unique one for people to get for sure, especially with Appa being fan favorite in general, of course.
Yeah, the Appa is interesting in the sense that like I don't think there's any way either 5-inch or 7-inch scale that the Appa works with the other figures. I think it's just the scale's just completely off, especially if the Appa's only going to be like what, $25. So my guess is just that it's going to be a decently sized Appa figure that will look like nice, like it's at a big enough scale to where they can do it well. I do wonder, like, is it going to be like articulated? Because that would be the, I think, first ever articulated Appa that we got, because all the old Appas from even the movie toy line and the original toy line were always just sort of like giant hunks of plastic with maybe like one moving part, and they were always like considered like a vehicle rather than like a action figure character. So that's going to be interesting to look at, to see how they do it, in that like, does Appa come with accessories, or does all of the budget go into just making it maybe as big as possible? And then I also do like that they have that other 5-inch figure, the kind of deluxe Aang, which I do wonder though, like how is the basic Aang different than the deluxe Aang? In terms of like, is it just going to be like a head sculpt difference, and then one comes with the glider, the other comes with like Momo or the staff or whatever? I'd like to see kind of more of a difference, because I think a lot of people are going to be like completionist with this, and it's going to be a little bit weird that if you order all of them, the basic Aang might be a little redundant. How do you think they'll handle that sort of stuff, like deluxe Aang versus the basic Aang?
Yeah, I'm also very curious about that. Like, if it's just sort of like accessories, like we see one with like the gliders and stuff, or if it really is the whole figure, or even if it's like slightly altered outfit, even if it is still in book 1 or something like that. I mean, I think there's a number of different ways they could do that. I mean, I hope it's not like what we've seen in the past, where it's like the shiny or tinted or anything like that. I have slightly more, I guess, faith in what they're going to do, but yeah, no, I'm not really sure. I mean, hope maybe it's just more effect parts. I think that could be cool to have, since that's something that is always interesting to see how they go about that, especially with figures that might be slightly more posable and stuff like that. So I don't know.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. Like, the best way to do it probably would be to have like one of them be book 3 Aang, one of them be book 1 Aang, but then you're missing out on like one of the gliders, either the book 1 glider or the book 3 glider, and which one is it? It's like, who knows? But yeah, I think the initial reaction to this was kind of like, okay, cool, they're doing a lot with it, but I saw a lot of people kind of going like, oh, 2 figures per wave, like we have to start like all over again. Basically, it's going to be ages before we get to sort of a Suki, or a character we've been waiting to see as an action figure for a while. In that they're going to want to do their book 1 figures, they're going to want to do their book 3 designs for the main cast, and then maybe eventually we get to the other ones. But it gives us an insight into, I'm guessing they're going to do roughly something similar to this with the Korra figures, and that they're willing to do creatures, so we'll probably see a Naga at the 7-inch scale. We'll probably see again the 5 and 7 inches, and then the statue is always an option, and we've never really seen Korra action figures, so I like that immediately. This new company, there's going to be multiple size classes to get, so it is interesting they're going for Avatar first, though, unless the Korra ones just haven't been announced. But that's really where we're at right now. But next up is probably the most notable piece of information from the last couple of weeks, and it only came out earlier this week. And that is the announcement of a brand new Dark Horse hardcover Avatar book. This is, in fact, the mysterious 6th deluxe edition book that will complete the set, along with all the reprints of the art books, the 1 Avatar, 4 Korra art books, and now this will be the thing that completes that set. The book is called The Beasts of the 4 Nations, Creatures from Avatar The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra. There's going to be 2 editions, of course, your standard hardcover and then your deluxe edition hardcover, and it's the exact same format as all the other deluxe editions, where you get the book with a nice cover that's going to have some kind of shiny details on it. You get a what's the thing called again? It's a folio with an art print in it. They're actually calling it an art print this time, as opposed to what on earth was the word that they were calling it in the previous ones? I don't really remember. But this book is obviously brand new. It's going to be 192 pages. I'll get to the release date in a second, just because there's a bit of a mix-up with it. But here is the details. So it says, dive into the world of Avatar The Last Airbender and Legend of Korra with this in-depth exploration of its animal inhabitants. Part of what everyone loves about the 4 nations is all the strange and wonderful and sometimes scary creatures that inhabit them. From the air nomads flying bison to Kyoshi Island's elephant koi to the Earth Kingdom's singing groundhogs and the little purple pentapus. Look to this hardcover collection for images and information on Avatar and Korra's creatures, large and small, including many from the spirit world. And it says the deluxe edition includes a gorgeous slipcase, a deluxe cover treatment, an art print, and folio to celebrate the unique and wonderful creatures of the Avatar world. Edelweiss put up their listings, and they have some key selling points here, which is, it says, guide to the creatures from the world of Avatar and Korra, insight and information on the animals of the fictional world, companion and guidebook for fans of Avatar and Korra, and gorgeous full color hardcover edition with cover art by Devin L. Kurtz. So that's all we know about it right now. Finally, the release date. So when this first got revealed, everyone found it by the Previews World listing, which obviously is that Dark Horse announced their books for this month, and included in it was this book. So people were a little late finding this, in that like other people not really in the fandom had seen this before the Avatar fandom finally saw it. And so all we had was the Previews World listing, which still says October 13th, 2021. And for a few days, this was the only listing for the book. It was only up on Previews World. But then when it finally went up on Amazon, Penguin Random House, all of the other publishers, it says December 14th, so 2 months afterwards. And so right now Previews World is the only place that says October. Everywhere else says December. And of course Dark Horse don't have this book up on their website to confirm to us which one is actually correct. I'm guessing it's December 14th because I'm assuming the more recent listings that went up probably do have the correct information, given that they all agree and Previews World is the one that's kind of wrong at this point. So unless they're doing some really weird thing where comic book stores are getting this book 2 months early, which I don't think is the case, there's been another release date kind of mix up with this. But that aside, Greg, what are your thoughts on this? Finally, another brand new book from Dark Horse.
Yeah, I know it's cool that we finally get the name of it, or what it was, because we were wondering for so long, what it was when they announced this whole redo of all of these in the deluxe format. So getting it finally and getting to see the cover, I think is definitely really neat to actually see. I think the art on it is really cool. So if that's any indication of what type of just in general, just sort of the feel that they're going for inside of the book, I think this is definitely going to be one to get. I think out of this whole new line of deluxe, this would be the one that I would be worth getting, considering I have all the other ones already. So I think this one is definitely going to be something that a lot of people are going to want to get. But I guess I am still curious of how they're going to sort of like break it down, and how I guess sort of like on point are they going to be with all the information in here, and how that's going to relate to what we currently know. And whenever they talk about spirits, I'm always curious of how that's going to play out, since that's one of those things that can either be hit or miss sometimes. So there's a lot that can go into this, but it definitely is really cool and interesting and fun to see that they're going with this type of one, rather than any other type of thing that we might have thought they were going to go with before, which I can't remember now.
Yeah, I think the speculation was either that it's either going to have to be an encyclopedia style book of some sort, which this ultimately is, or they just do like an art book about the comics that they've already done, which would have been fine, I suppose, but a little bit boring, and might have repeated information from all the library editions. So this is definitely a better option, but I don't think anyone quite called like a specific encyclopedia focusing just on the animals, but it's actually a really good choice, and that way they can focus in on something that's probably one of the more unique aspects of Avatar, in that like we don't know a ton about a lot of the animals, so this is actually going to hopefully include a lot of new information. This is where like I'd be a little bit critical of just the description being like exceptionally vague about like, they don't say encyclopedia anywhere, but they're specifying that it's going to be like images, but also like insight and information, and it's going to be a guidebook about the animals. So just because it's like part of a set with otherwise books that are mainly art books with not a lot of text, that are mainly visual, you'd lean towards this maybe being a little bit more visual, but it's 192 pages, and I suppose, what are your thoughts on like, are they getting all new art for the animals here, or are we going to see screenshots from the comic, screenshots from the show? That seems a little weird if they did that, given what Dark Horse usually do. So I'm guessing this is going to have to be like completely new art. They're going to have to get writers on board to write like flavor text stuff about all these animals. But how new do you think this is going to be?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's something that I was wondering. I mean, I don't know. I mean, usually with the quality that we, sort of expect from this, we sort of would think that it would be all new, but I don't know. That's with the amount of page count, like you just said, that definitely seems like that's a bit much. And, since it is more of an art type of book, I'm not expecting like, like chapters and chapters breaking down, flying bison and the dragons and everything like that, because even it feels like a lot of that is still stuff that's being worked on just in terms of just the show in general, and just how things actually work in the universe. So I don't know, I'd be worried or just interested or intrigued on how they actually go about sort of, framing those stories, about, sort of like if they go into the history or some of the legends or sort of how they, how things were like in the beginning of the Avatar world and everything, like we saw with Wan and everything. I don't know, that could be, I don't know, they have a lot that they can pull from, but it also seems like there's a lot more that they have to like extrapolate from that we don't already know or that isn't like officially canon or anything like that. So I don't know. It definitely seems like there's a lot that's going to have to go into it, which I guess is, why it would be sort of one of the ones that, didn't start off everything. So I don't know. I wonder how long they sort of have been working on this, or have they been, working on this since the beginning? Because, then, they have had, more than enough time to actually, get all this together. But I don't know. I guess I wouldn't be surprised somewhat if they had, some stuff from the show just to show, in relation to, where this came up in the story, like in book one, this happened, book two, this happened in this episode and stuff like that. So I wouldn't be surprised if there, isn't some stuff pulled from the actual show. I mean, it'll probably be like up-res and cleaned up and stuff like that. But I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if there's, a good amount of stuff that is pulled from the show.
Yeah, like I was waiting because like I had to cover this in like two videos because the previous world doesn't say what the page count is. Because when it was first announced, I was kind of thinking this book will probably be more around the length of the book one art book, which is like 50 or so pages less than all the other ones. It'll be like 140 pages.
Mm-hmm.
I was shocked to see that it was like 192, which is a lot. Because like I wouldn't say we know 200 pages worth of information on the animals of Avatar, because the cover, I think, kind of tells the whole story in a way. We know about sky bison, we know about dragons, badger moles, Naga as a polar bear dog, and the lion turtles are obviously super interesting. A lot of the other animals we don't really know that much about. Like flying lemurs, you can add a little bit more about. Turtle ducks, which are on the cover. Komodo rhino, again, they're also there. Pabu, the fire ferret, and the cat deer, like Mula, Juan's animal. They're sort of like the main ones that like we actually sort of know stuff about. And this book is going to have to be like, I suppose it will have a section on sort of non-hybrid animals. I think we have like just plain cats. We have the bear, of course. So they'll have probably a weird section on that. But stuff like, Armadillo Bear, are they going to delve into that? And that, like, one of the comics features an Armadillo Bear, which I think is the only time we really see one outside of, I think, the Tale of Aang. There's going to be interesting things like that, of like, they can obviously fill out some information with just, we see this animal in this episode. But I'm guessing the way they're framing it, like, they're going to attempt to put stuff into play of just like the general size of these animals, like the general weight of these animals, how long they live or something like that. They're going to try and make a little bit of a fact file thing about them, which obviously means that you then get to the lion turtle, which is obviously the focus of the cover, and it's definitely one of the most interesting animals in the Avatar world. What's the page or two on the lion turtle going to say? Because the lion turtle probably has the most sort of kind of major but also major questionable information about it in canon at the moment. The idea that the lion turtle who gave Aang energy bending is quote unquote the last lion turtle, and that it is the last lion turtle because all the other lion turtles were hunted to extinction apparently, which made sense to a degree back when we only knew about the one lion turtle. But now that we've seen Korra and we sort of know roughly where the other ones went, that story doesn't quite fit. So are they going to maintain that canon and still talk about the Avatar lion turtle as the last one, or is there going to be like new information, or will it just be left out that it's theoretically the last one? That's where I'm kind of wondering like what they're going to do here, and that's why I hope, when they eventually like announce more information about it, that they have like a Tim Hedrick working on this, or they worked with Mike and Brian at least on some of the information with this book, because I'd hate for a book like this to come out and then finally give us like new information and it not feel right or canon or stuff like that. But for something like say that, the lion turtle, where a lot of it's a little vague, the information we got in around ATLA time. How do you think they're going to handle like being very accurate or canonical and stuff like that?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, that's a tough one because that, really forms like a basis of a lot of the Avatar world in general, just, inherently from what we've seen from beginnings and what we at least initially thought from ATLA. So I don't know. I wonder how in depth on those pages are they actually going to go, or if it's going to be like that'll be one of the ones that's more like an art focused, like double spread or triple spread or whatever. So it's just more art than actual info text dump. So no, I'm not sure. That's a lot for them to go in that. And I would think that might be something that they would want to tackle with the new stuff that actually comes out in animated form. So maybe they'll actually wind up holding back a little bit of information on that, which I guess I wouldn't really be surprised.
Yeah, I suppose it is just about like there's kind of clear cut stuff that you'd want them to cover. Like on the Dragon page, you want them to mention at some point that it is the sort of like original animal for firebending, and that the Sun Warriors learned from them and stuff like that. Just at least mention that much. But if they did go a bit more in depth about the history of them in terms of like how old the dragons live, if they gave us maybe a little bit more insight into why Sozin decided to start hunting dragons and what exactly happened there in the middle of all that, that'd be nice. Similarly with the Sky Bison, if they use this book as maybe a way to fill in a little bit of the gap and maybe again fully canonize, did Aang find a herd of Sky Bison in between the series or not? Because we've taken, I think, a quote from like I think one of the art books and like a piece of information that visually isn't particularly canon, but they're roughly running with as being the truth, but we don't know about it. And then like I suppose one of the other questions I have is just like what writing style are they going to go for here? Like, are they going to be like writing it as if it's like in universe, like that this is like someone who like has actually in universe wrote an encyclopedia, or is it going to be written more like a Avatar wiki entry? That's something I would like to know, is just which way they can do it, because if they do it very in universe, that gives them the out to not go in depth on the Lion Turtles, and that who would know about that. So which way do you think they're going to go there?
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I mean, I think it probably would be better for them to go in the universe just so that they could have, the out there with, you could say that there's some historical reference or someone from, Ba Sing Se University or something like that, someone who has, some general knowledge, or someone who's, just like a scholar or something in universe who does, knows a bit more than like, say, like the average person or anything like that, who does know some of the legend and lore, but will remain nameless or whatever. That could be a fun skew for them to sort of tell the story within the book, and they could do sort of like more of a narrative type of thing if they go that route, rather than sort of like an outside of approach versus someone who actually like, as opposed to like sort of like someone who actually has like all the information, like behind the scenes type of stuff on it. But no, I don't know, I think the in-universe one might be a bit more fun if they go more story with it. At least that'll be like an interesting sort of take on it.
Yeah, and then I think they can flesh out a few more pages, and I'm guessing they'll probably roughly try and break it down into like animals by the nations that they're from. And that way you can start off the section on like animals of the air nomads, and you can have just like a general page describing the typical types of animals and like why these animals specifically have a habitat like near the air temples or whatever. That would help to explain a few things, kind of like we have in some of the more fact-filey style books we have already, just with more sort of concrete information. Then maybe like you sort of wonder like, will they go a bit more in depth on some of the more like named animals? Like, will like Appa specifically get a section, or will he just be name dropped as like a notable example of a Sky Bison? That sort of thing. They could always do that if they wanted to flesh out some stuff. But Yeah, we're going to be waiting a little bit for this book, not till December. But I suppose the final point on this is that, interestingly, I don't think anyone expected this book to be announced, especially until I didn't expect it to be announced until after they'd announced all of the Korra art book reprints. But right now we only have 1 and 2 announced. 1 is out, 2 is coming out in September. The book 3 and the book 4 second edition art book haven't been announced yet. So for the deluxe set, where the slipcase is going to have part of the overall image, is this book 4 or is this book 6? Is what I'm wondering. Like, which part of the overall image is this? Because I think it's going to annoy a lot of people if this is the 4th book and you suddenly go ATLA, Korra Book 1, Korra Book 2, Beast of the Four Nations, and then 2 Korra ones. That will just really frustrate people. So I hope this is just like that. It's the end bit of the image. They've just released it out of sequence. But do you have any thoughts on that?
I wonder. That's a good point. I don't know. I mean, that seems kind of odd if they were to put it in the middle of it, right? I mean, the fact that they're coming out with it now, you definitely would have thought that they would have waited on it. At least, I don't know. I think when we initially heard of this, we definitely thought it was going to be a lot farther out, especially not knowing anything about it at the time. So it is, curious that they're sort of putting it out now rather than sort of holding it back, or maybe they just happen to have all the work done with this one, so they're willing to put it out now just to sort of get things going.
Yeah, at the very least, this might help to explain why maybe things have slowed down with a lot of the other books, in that if the way that this kind of appears to be, that like the Previews World listing does say written by various, art by various, and then it specifies the cover artist, they have potentially had to organize getting like hundreds of pieces of artwork from potentially like bunch of different people, and it probably has been maybe one of their bigger projects, that like potentially like all new pieces of art, plus I'd assume at least a team of writers working on putting all this information together and making it accurate. Like, this probably is one of their like bigger books that they've probably ever had to work on, assuming there's going to be like actual new information in it and it's filled with like new pieces of art. Because even the art books, like, sure, there's probably organization to do as they like went through all the kind of concept art stuff that they had, the materials that they were given, but it was all there. It was just to organize. This time out, it has to all be made, and I suppose all fit and be canon. All the art has to get approved. So I guess that might explain the immediate delay, and why we've been waiting a while to hear about like a big new book, and here it is. And I suppose just finally, do you have any thoughts on the whole release date thing? That like initially it was October 13th, and then like 2 days after it's announced, it's December everywhere.
Yeah, I don't know, that feels to me more like just like a misstate on terms of the first one that was getting up there, even though it seems kind of odd that that would be the one that would have the misstate, I think, out of all of them. But no, that definitely seems like sort of just like an early mistake, especially considering that it is, near to the end of the year, and it's not like, it's not like it's, a period of time and then they set it, delayed, which is normally what happens because, stuff comes up or whatever. This was pretty much like right out the gate. So I don't know. I think I definitely would say it's just like an error in sort of the posting to begin with.
Yeah, not really sure on that. I think the only time something like this happened before was with the Chibi book, when like I think EW announced it and they said the book was out in July, but then all the listings that went up said September, but it's since been delayed into October. So who knows? Like, hopefully this doesn't receive another delay, but that's been Dark Horse recently, more delays. Next piece of news, and I suppose last piece of news, is kind of confirmed. It really comes down to like it comes from Avatar News, formerly known as Korra News, and they're saying that this is their source, quote unquote their source. Like, they obviously have exclusive information here, but they can't reveal the source. I don't think the information is so substantial that like it's something that just is like unbelievable, so I'm inclined to believe it, because typically Avatar News does, cover stuff pretty well. And in this case, all it is, it's about the Netflix live action Avatar. It's just confirming the characters' ages that they're kind of, I suppose, they've locked in at this point, as well as forecasting the ethnicities for the actors that they're sort of looking for each character. So for character ages, they're confirming Aang is going to be 12 in the live action, Katara is going to be 14, Sokka is going to be 16, and Zuko is going to be 17. So Aang and Katara, exactly the same. Sokka is 1 year older, apparently, than his ATLA animated self, and Zuko is also 1 year older than his animated version. So this obviously is very different than the rumors that we heard about months ago that were suggesting Katara was going to also be aged up to be about like 16, and that Aang was still going to be left at 12. So I don't actually mind this too much. People are going to be frustrated by any sort of a change, but this doesn't change. Like, I think with the old Katara information, it was implying that Katara was going to be the older sibling, but they're keeping it this way. The reason I like this and I don't mind it is that I think for especially a live action series, I kind of appreciate the age gap between Katara and Sokka being made bigger, just to kind of clarify that, like, Aang, Katara, and Toph are going to be the younger members of the team, and then Sokka, Zuko, Suki are going to be the older members of the team, and creating just that bigger age gap, especially the sort of 14, 15, 16 kind of specific years, I think helps to make that sort of clear, which I kind of like, of just making it clear that these are the younger characters, young teens, and here's the older teens. So I suppose just first on the ages here, do you have any thoughts on this, behind why they're making only very subtle changes here?
No, I mean, it doesn't, for me also, it doesn't bother me as much. I mean, I think whenever things are adapted to live action, just because of, just the way it works and just sort of like the logistics of having actors and everything like that, or, people that look the ages of, the ages that they're going for in the show, which is usually how things work out most of the time. No, the ages that they're going for doesn't bother me per se. I mean, I think, like you said before, the way that we had the ages before and how that potentially could have, was skewing what people thought, as far as like, the relationships and all the stuff like that. I think that, definitely seemed a bit odd. But this way that they're going right now, with the distinction, like you said, between the younger and olders, I think for me it works. And, it'll just be really up to, how they actually do, the story, if it, even works at all, if it seems awkward or anything like that. So as of now, not knowing anything else other than the next little bit of news, it seems fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then the other addition onto this was just that, again, from the same source, apparently, the ethnicities that they're going to be going for with the characters are Aang, they're looking for Asian slash, East Asian or South Asian. For Katara and Sokka, it's going to be Native American or Indigenous North American, and then for Zuko, it's going to be like Aang, East Asian or South Asian. So again, they're trying to be, accurate here to what the nations in the show are kind of based on in real life, while leaving, I suppose, some leeway to choose, I suppose, the best actor candidate as well. This is kind of hard to discuss without like actually knowing what actors they're sort of considering, and how they look, and how they fit the characters, but it's nice to know they're at least putting in the effort to make it like authentic to what the series kind of is at its core. So that's good, and I like how the information is working out. We're like, okay, apart from some very minor changes so far, it seems like they're aiming to be accurate. That at least is a good sign for the series. But did you have any thoughts on this sort of, I suppose, casting information here?
No, I think like what most people are saying, the fact that they're putting this in the forefront, since this is a very sort of hot topic in general, not just for this show, but just in general in society right now, I think is it's a good thing that they're putting it out there. Although I guess we're still waiting for like the official notice of all of this information. But the fact that this is coming out in one way or another, I think is definitely a good thing. But yeah, without knowing, who they're actually casting and, if they're good or anything like that, that'll really make, I guess, the difference when this is actually all sort of coming to pass. But, it's still very early. It's not sort of like, open or anything like that. It's still very close right now.
Yeah, and that's the final piece of information. Is just that I think if previously they were planning, I think when Michael Bryan was still on board, they were planning to do open casting, but now it looks like it's just a normal casting process. And I think we found out previously the filming was meant to, I think, begin in August, I think it was, but apparently now that's been pushed to November, which I guess there's just some delays in the process. I'm not sure exactly why or anything like that, but it's not being pushed back too much. What it does though seem like is that very much means that by the time, if this properly goes ahead and continues like this show is probably going to come out at in or around the same time as whatever the first Avatar Studios project is, if they begin to line up effectively. So that's going to be quite interesting to see, like, which one actually ends up coming out first. Because this being further delayed, it's like, yeah, it's now looking like end of 2022 we're going to be right in the middle of like information about this show and whatever Avatar Studios thing is, which it's going to be pretty exciting to see. Obviously the interest in this show specifically has dropped quite a lot because of Avatar Studios, but if it turns out good, it's just this kind of added bonus on top of the really good content we're expecting. So, and then if it's bad, we just don't need to care about it because there's all this other stuff happening. But I suppose, where are you at with the live action? Do you care now after all this Avatar Studios stuff, or are you still kind of interested?
I mean, it's Avatar, so I'm vaguely interested in it just in general because of what it's about, but it's definitely not something I'm putting like all of my hope in or anything like that. So it'll just be something that it'll either work out or it'll just sort of be almost sort of like swept under the rug, I guess, I suppose, with everything that's else is coming out at least. But I'm sure when it does come out, it's going to get a huge amount of buzz. It's going to be on a lot of people's watch lists. You'll see it on the Netflix, and maybe it'll get to it'll get their little top number badge on it for a little bit. So, but it's still very early, and it'll have to really come out. I think when we see like a trailer or something like that, or maybe actual casting of the actors and actresses, then maybe we can say a bit more about it for sure.
Yeah. I do. I think I've said this before, but I do think it's probably in the best interest for this show to probably attempt to get its information out before Avatar Studios stuff comes out, just so it's not competing against that stuff. In that, like, if they're actually going to make a good effort at this and not go crazy over the top with it, I think they sort of need to be first to get the attention, because if they're behind, I think it could get lost in a lot of the hype for the Avatar Studios stuff. But we're still so early in both of them. Like, we've heard about this live action show for years and years, and we've mainly heard negative information, and now it's only finally just starting to start. Like, we're only now just getting the this is the initial casting information. So that shows kind of where we're at. So that's pretty much all the news. I was hoping that we would have got preview pages for Suki alone at some point this week, because usually the preview pages come out about 2 months before the book is released, but I didn't see them anywhere. So I'm hoping that's like next week maybe, or who knows, because we need some new content, and Suki alone is obviously the next sort of book coming out. So there's a lot of hype surrounding that, so hopefully that happens. But yeah, that's all the news that we have. So we're going to finish up with a bit of a discussion on an interesting post that the official Avatar social media channels put up sometime, it was about 2 weeks ago, I suppose, at this point. But they just put it up, a nice image, sort of diagram showing off, a look at some different types of sub-bending, and I have it as like a circle split into kind of four here, one for each element, and then within each element they have listed off three different sub-bending categories. I did a video on this on my channel, but I think it's worth kind of discussing some more. I suppose, Greg, which element do you want to start with?
Let's say we'll just go with air to start with.
Yeah, like air is probably one of the most interesting ones on the list, because in terms of how I categorize like special bending techniques, air is probably like the one of the like least fleshed out ones. What they have for it is that they have spirit projection, flight, and temperature regulation. I think most people would agree spirit projection and flight sort of fit. Temperature regulation to me is just a kind of, what's the best way to describe it? Just like a sort of like buff almost that airbenders have, not necessarily like a technique. It's just this like inherent thing that if you are airbending correctly, you have control over temperature regulation. And it's the same thing that basically firebenders have as well. That good breathing technique grants you temperature regulation for air, and more or less the same for fire, and it's required for all bending. I wouldn't call it a sub-bending because it's barely even a technique. But the other ones make sense because flight obviously is the Zahir Gurulahima technique that you have to basically give up all attachments to achieve. I'd associate this as sort of being the lightning and metal bending equivalent, but for air. And then we have our spiritual technique for air, which is spirit projection, which Jinora basically directly says is a spiritual airbending technique in book 3. So that fits because it's a special technique that she sort of learned. It's different than just standard meditating into the spirit world because she has so much more control over where she can put her spirit that we haven't really seen before. So I think that fits as like a spiritual technique. I think they wanted to have 3 for each because some of the other elements clearly have 3. Air, we obviously don't know about a sort of bloodline special ability, and I think that's what's missing. But what are your thoughts on what they've chosen for air here?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in terms of, things that we've seen airbenders do or things that we know of them doing as of now, they work. I would say, I would agree that temperature regulation seems like more like an inherent sort of airbending sort of, offset ability rather than something that you have to like really specialize and focus in. So, it's interesting that they're putting it in that regard. But, I don't have like, it doesn't upset me or anything like that it's there. It's just something that I wouldn't have seen as being a highlight, ability of, an airbender per se. Like, you could say, I don't know. We haven't really got to those, like when people always talking about like, sound or something like that, or, the ability to like, move really fast or something like that. Those all are stuff that, those are things that I guess like the being able to move fast, what I would consider like, just sort of something that you can sort of do as an offset of your sort of normal airbending abilities rather than something really, really, specialized that only like, the top airbenders can do, other than, their own particular techniques that they've developed themselves.
Yeah, and this obviously gets into this weird situation of like, what exactly do you define a sub-bending technique to be versus what is just a technique of that element, and we'll get into that with some of the other ones. Like water, I think is probably the one that like works the most. What the best, I think, is the one that they got like sort of completely right, and that they have spirit bending, healing, and blood bending. So spirit bending is your spiritual water technique. It uses water bending quite clearly, but it's spiritual in nature because it involves like augmenting the kind of balance of a spirit. Healing obviously is this technique that it appears as if you really go for it as a waterbender, you can learn it, but there's also an implication that certain people have a talent for it. I think that's what like Zhang Zhang says to Katara, is that like, oh, you have the talent for this, and you're a healer, and she kind of was able to do it without any training, and then trained at it to become even better. But we see Kyoshi also just learns it. So this is your sort of, again, lightning metal flight, equivalent technique, where it's not like super limited, but it's not like super rare. And then bloodbending, at least for me, in terms of the way I'd categorize it, I'd specify this as the Yukon family bloodbending, as opposed to just general bloodbending, because anyone under the full moon can do bloodbending if they're reasonably skilled. So this is obviously Yukon's family is born with the ability to bloodbend without the need of the full moon, and then taking it a step further, they can turn it into a technique where they don't even use their hands, so psychic bloodbending. And I think that works really clearly in terms of just spirit, advanced sort of subbending technique, and then kind of bloodline super rare technique. It fits perfectly for me with water bending. But what are your thoughts on the water selection?
Yeah, I think I can agree that these mostly, these pretty much work for what they're sort of going for here in terms of being, pretty specialized. Some of these, I mean, I don't know, I feel like a lot of these, there's like a level of these that maybe almost anybody who's sufficiently skilled can learn, but there's always like a way to push these skills to like the next level per se, versus where we would consider like, airbending, like, temperature regulation, that's pretty much anyone. And as of now, there's not like a level of that can be pushed to, the next level where it's like highly specialized and you have to train a lot. But for spirit bending in general, that's something that, as of now, we haven't seen too many people who actually have that ability. And healing, while it does seem like a lot of people can learn it, there's definitely some applications of that's very sort of specialized, that can even cause, harm in some cases, as we've seen like Yoshi. And then bloodbending, like you said, yeah, definitely if you take it to the bloodline limit, or even just if you're able to master it to some degree, that's sort of like above needing just the moon. It seems like that's something that's very sort of specialized that not everyone's going to be developed. Even just, having the technique down seems like it's something that, you really have to be focused on actually learning, or be, exposed to it in order to get it in the first place.
And then, like, obviously in the comments on this, like, this got a lot of discussion because, obviously different people have different versions of like how they interpret this. A lot of people are saying like, what about plant bending? Why is that not here? And obviously, like, plant bending is basically the same thing as blood bending, just with plants, effectively. But it's still, it's its own technique, yes, but it's more of just like the swamp benders are able to do that in the swamp more because of their like environment more so than anything else. Because as we saw, like Hugh's swamp bending isn't like super practical outside of the swamp, and that like in the invasion he had to use like seaweed, I think, and it took him ages to gather it all. So it's just it's a specialized technique, but it's not exactly like sub bending in that like Katara just picks up plant bending like that. Like there's no like extra learning necessarily to it. It's just a water bending technique. Let's move into Earth here. So what they have on the diagram is lava, sand bending, and metal bending. So this is kind of interesting that like metal obviously fits. Like we saw Toph discover this on screen, and we followed the story basically of metal across Avatar into Korra, that initially only one person has it, and that's Toph. She opens up a school. She finds people who are, talented, who show a talent for metal, and they become the next sort of metal bending masters. But then, by the time we get to Korra, Su Yin is talking about metal bending as if anyone can learn it, and we have a whole town in the Earth Kingdom, Zaofu, that is basically all metal benders. We have a metal bender police force, and the school kind of went on for a certain amount of time. So this has become relatively common, but still not everyone can learn it, as we sort of saw with Bolin. But even with Bolin, they still sort of implied that if he devoted himself to it, he could have learned it. Lava, as we've seen, there's only like what, three non-avatar lava benders: Gazan, Bolin, and Sun. That's your bloodline ability, special. You have to be born with it. Sandbending to me is just earthbending, and I think the reason for that is just that Toph struggles with it initially, but then by the end she is basically a master sandbender. Like it's a different type, and there's a different style to it, and it's basically your sort of plant bending equivalent for me, but it's not really.
That's what I was gonna say.
It's not really the. It's sort of like different environment style bending type thing. But what are your thoughts on what they've chosen here for Earth?
Yeah, I mean, I think just starting with the sand, like you were just saying, that seems like it's more like a specialized earth bending, but it doesn't seem like it's something that stands out on its own. It seems like it's just, where you're at, and that's the type of earth that you're around, that's what you're going to inherently sort of learn how to bend. And, because of that, of course, you'll be better at bending it in those specific ways versus, just sort of your traditional sort of earth from, other areas. So I don't know. That's the one where I don't quite see it as enough to be its own sort of sub thing. I mean, I'm sure there are, plenty of techniques that we, probably haven't been exposed to or whatever that might make it seem more so that it's, something on its own. But I don't know. I'm trying to think. It doesn't seem enough to me, at least as of what we've seen so far, and maybe that's just because we just haven't seen enough to be on its own. But lava and metal, I think those work enough, even though metal has definitely progressed to the point where it is a lot more commonplace, such as what we'll see in some of the other sort of techniques that we're going to talk here. But yeah, I mean, lava, that's definitely like, as of now, more of a bloodline thing that's very sort of specialized, that I don't know, maybe it'll become more commonplace in another 100 years or whatever, but as of now it's pretty specialized.
Yeah, the thing with metal is, of course, that like Toph made the teaching of that super public, so it wasn't at all hidden. She discovered it and immediately moved to pass it on. So even though it's an advanced technique, the knowledge of sort of how to do it is out there for pretty much anyone to try, versus say lightning. The way lightning is kind of implied, it's that specific individuals had it and almost like hid it from other people, and that like the royal family sought it out and got it at a certain point, lost it, regained it, and they've kept it within specific families rather than like being super public about it. So it speaks to the idea that like the likes of metal, lightning, I suppose healing as well, are techniques and flight, where if you have the right knowledge and you're reasonably skilled, you can typically achieve it, if you put the time in. But there's other ones where like you just have to be born with it. Sandbending, I can see why they put it there, just because like sandbenders, like you can imagine there being a whole specific style associated with it. The main problem is just that we've never seen a sandbender in like full flow in action. That like, what exactly can they do if like an avatar mastered sandbending? They could probably do some pretty crazy stuff, but it's still just earthbending. I suppose the way I sort of interpret this is more like, if you got a random earthbender who's good, but they only know normal earthbending, and showed them like, look, here's someone metal bending, you try to do it, they're not going to be able to do it straight away. They're going to need time to like understand the concept of metal bending, that you're bending the tiny little bits inside the metal. You have to gain that understanding and work to focus in on those tiny little bits. With lava bending, they're obviously not going to achieve anything, even if lava's directly in front of them, because they just don't have that ability. But if you show them sand bending, they're going to attempt to bend the sand, and they're going to move some sand. They might not do it perfectly first time, but they'll earth bend it because it's just earth. So it's just learning a new technique that is different than what you typically expect. And I think that's kind of a good way to look at it with some of these things of like, metal is difficult because of the precision required. Lava is just only open to a few people, but sand, anyone can bend sand. It's just, there's still a skill and a technique to it. It's just, it's possible to bend it. Even Toph was moving some sand when she was basically blind. And then we get to actually, sorry, the last point on Earth is just that, to me, what they're missing here is that I'd replace sandbending with whatever the spiritual technique for earthbending is. Now, do we know a spiritual technique for earthbending? That's the question. I've often said it's potentially the like super seismic sense that Toph seems to have in the swamp, where she talks about like being able to see what her daughters are doing in Republic City and Zaofu, that she is using seismic sense because obviously she's blind, she can't just see. And I don't get the implication that she's doing the same spirit connection thing through the vines that Korra does. So it's some sort of like special seismic sense. That could be it. It could be, even though I don't really agree with it, it could be the Lao Ge, like live forever technique, which is very earthbender in its philosophy. But what are your thoughts on that? The idea that there is a spiritual technique for the other three elements that we like clearly know about, but maybe not for Earth.
Yeah, no, that's what I was just curious about. I mean, I don't know. I think there definitely, I mean, I'm sure there is one, and we just haven't been, sort of, they haven't written it in, or, however it works. But I think that would be interesting just to see. I mean, I guess just the whole idea of, something that, maybe, Kyoshi's figured out over time, something along those lines where a character that we know who's more focused on Earth is more spiritually inclined would be able to sort of, I don't know, have some sort of communication. I mean, the idea of like, the larger range seismic sense, or I don't know, the idea of being able to live or control, more of the elements of your actual body. I mean, I don't know, the whole thing with the body, that seems like something that, potentially anyone who's reasonably spiritually inclined might be able to sort of figure out if they have enough time and they have, the right set of instruction. I mean, it just happens to be that as of now we only know of two, maybe three, people who might use that technique, and, maybe there are others, but, we are also seeing, other characters that have also lived, extendedly long from other nations as well. So it doesn't seem, at least to me, it doesn't seem like that by default is inherently only Earthbender related. I mean, I could see it being sort of like Earth philosophy, and that's definitely seems where, a lot of it comes from, at least as we've been explained so far, but it doesn't seem like it's so isolated as of yet. But you never know. That would be a good one if that is the case. Or I'm just trying to think of anything else from the Kyoshi novels where they were more spiritually, like in terms of like how they were supposed to be able to find the Avatar, or anything along those lines that would be more along the lines of something more spiritual that would be like earthbending focus, like some technique that the sages have, that's been sort of like passed down, or at least when the sages were more, spiritually inclined. So I don't know. That definitely should be one there for sure, but maybe that's coming.
Yeah, there's the thing in the Kyoshi novels, like early on, where when they explain the Earth method of finding the Avatar, and it's like the master Earthbenders use like bone trigrams. They don't explain very well like what the implication of like what they do necessarily is, but like it breaks, and like from the way it breaks, they use earthbending to sense like the Avatar's in this direction or something like that, which maybe implies some sort of like seismic sense type thing. Not really sure, but yeah, you bring up a good point that like with the Lao Ge thing, it likely is just the case that the people that we happen to see use it all are earthbenders, but it's just a technique that is Earth in its philosophy, but that doesn't mean it's earthbending, which we'll get into here with firebending, and something I don't remember ever seeing before in the fandom, but I saw so much on posts about this, of that being, people think that redirection is not a firebending technique, that any bender can learn lightning redirection. That's what apparently a lot of people have interpreted that as, because there's so many people, quote unquote, correcting this diagram with the idea that redirection shouldn't be here because it's not a firebending technique. I'm like, but it is. It's just using a different philosophy, which doesn't mean it's a different bending style. Like I get Iroh says that he learned it from the waterbenders and watching them, but it's just firebending utilizing that in the same way that Zhang Zhang uses like defensive firebending, which is kind of like fire earthbending. He uses fire walls. Doesn't mean he's an earthbender, and that sort of thing. But yeah, for fire on the diagram, they have lightning, combustion, and redirection. The only thing I disagree with here is that I think redirection is just a part of lightning. I get they're the two techniques, associated with lightning, but I don't think they should be separate on the diagram. I think redirection should be replaced with the Bonte tribe fire kind of spirit sensing healing technique, which we see in Beginnings and Shadow of Kyoshi. That they double down on it, that a specific tribe has access to a firebending spiritual sensory technique, which fits in line with, spirit bending and spirit projection. And I think you have the list correct otherwise. Lightning is your advanced technique that if you have a teacher who knows it and you're reasonably skilled, you probably can learn. Combustion you have to be born with. We've only seen 2 combustion benders. And then again, redirection is just a lightning technique. And then there's the spiritual technique, which I've already discussed. What are your thoughts on the what they have here in the fire section? And I suppose as well your thoughts on the whole redirection controversy, apparently.
Yeah, that is a interesting thing for that to be coming up. I mean, I don't know. I guess I can see why, the idea and the philosophy of that would come up, but then that also seems kind of odd in terms of just, sort of the idea of like, sort of just earthbending being able to live forever and that sort of thing. So I don't know. It's an interesting sort of point that they're making there, because I mean, I definitely wouldn't expect, Katara to be able to redirect lightning. That doesn't seem like that would work in my mind, even though, she's a waterbender and she understands the flow of pretty much, water and just that philosophy in general along the lines with, airbender, by themselves understands that just as much, I would say. But I wouldn't expect them to be able to redirect lightning just because they don't understand, they don't have the inherent, chi abilities and able to, manipulate fire, lightning in that sort of way. At least as of now, we don't know that. So that's an interesting, sort of idea that's sort of coming across now. I definitely see redirection more as sort of like an advanced lightning technique that you have to like, learn lightning or, learn redirection, and then that sort of takes it to the next level there. And, combustion, as we've said, is more of the bloodline limit as of now that we're seeing. That would be one that would be really cool to get more information on in general. But yeah, I mean, that's interesting. I mean, I don't know. I have the feeling that like the whole Bonte tribe sort of, healing or spiritual sort of like sensing is something that's more abstract or more, esoteric, that not everyone sort of, gets it in terms of being that way, even though we're sort of always sort of mentioning that as a thing, and, it is in the novels as well. So I don't know. It almost seems like that might be like an oversight type thing that just wouldn't sort of get caught in sort of the production of this, although I don't know, you would think that some people from the official would actually know that, but that's definitely not how things work at all in the real world. So I don't know, that's definitely interesting. I think it would be cool that there would be, if we're going along the lines of what you're saying of, there should be something spiritual from each nation just to sort of balance things out. I think that would definitely be one to put there. But I don't know. I mean, the other two there, it seems to work for the most part. And, the way that they have it structured, it kind of makes sense, I guess. But yeah, I think there definitely could be other ones that they could put there that might potentially work better.
Yeah. And then, yeah, just going into lightning redirection a little bit more. The reason I think it's pretty clear that you are still bending lightning, even though it's redirection, is the way Iroh explains how the technique works. He directly says to Zuko, like, you take it in one arm, and then make sure you like direct it through your stomach. Whereas just like for all the other benders, it's just like, how are they directing lightning without bending it to hit their stomach and not their heart? And then obviously like, where's the fire chakra? It's in the stomach. Now, admittedly, you can make the case that our newly discovered Dantian is where they're also redirecting it. So it's like, is it the fire chakra they're talking about, or is it the Dantian? Who knows? But either way, there's a sense of the firebender is controlling the lightning in their body to make sure it goes through a specific spot, which is the energy center of the body, the Sea of Chi. I think it's actually in that scene where Iroh says that the stomach is the Sea of Chi, and then you direct it out the other arm. So my implication is that the people who are thinking it's not a firebending technique are literally assuming that it's just this sort of like boomerang technique almost, where it literally just, if you take in lightning in one hand, it just like flows through your body in that way and comes out, and so anyone could do it. When especially, I think the scene that makes it really clear is when Zuko redirects lightning against Ozai. He very clearly like takes it in, he sort of like contains it, controls it, and then he fires out like basically his own lightning. It's not like this sort of continuous thing where it's just what comes in like kind of comes out the same. He like specifically like lightning just comes out of his other hand, like he's generating it himself, even though it's already been made for him. And I think that's the kind of key point. When they first show it, like Iroh redirecting normal lightning, it looks more like it's just a case of like he, you know, channeled it from one arm out the other and he didn't really control it or anything like that. But the way the explanation goes, and I think pretty much every other time we've seen it, it is very much a case of like, you take it in, you are controlling it, containing it, you are doing stuff to it. And I think the mistake is that a lot of people are assuming it's this like automatic process in the body, when it's not. That like the reason Zuko gets hurt in the finale is because he has to do this like diving leap in front of Katara, where he doesn't have time to control it or be in the right position to perform the technique. So it's just that sort of thing. And again, bending gets confusing when you try and look at it from a technical point of view, in that I think probably the most complicated question for anyone to answer is, you know, why can't an airbender just bend fire? If bending is just basically bending energy, what's the limiter on like you can only bend air specifically and fire specifically? Now, you can come up with your own theory and stuff like that, and there's maybe a little bit of an explanation there, but I get the confusion from people who don't look at it like super in depth, because Avatar isn't super clear about like bending when it gets technical, in that the explanation of how to generate lightning and then lightning redirections is probably like the most complicated it like ever gets, I would say. But do you have any more thoughts on the whole redirection debate?
No, I don't think I have anything more to add to that. I think, just, I don't know, I guess it's hard to sort of, I guess, interpret, from what you see, directly visualized to, what's actually said into it versus, what might be, later on in more detail in sort of other media. And like you said, it's not a very, technically oriented show. It's more about the techniques and the idea and the philosophy and the flow of things, rather than, hard, science or anything like that.
Yeah, like there's a lot of stuff like that where it's clear that there are specific limits that they place on the techniques, and that there are some things they will never show a bender of this element doing because it just doesn't make any sense. Like I think one thing that's come up a lot that I don't think we've talked about before is just the idea of like, can an earthbender basically make themselves like fly by like bending a platform of earth underneath themselves and doing it that way? And like, we've never seen that before, and my answer is obviously like, I'm guessing that they're going to say no, because that would make all earthbenders basically have the ability to fly, which is something that's more associated with airbending. and that and I think like in terms of a technical explanation, it's this case of like physics still applies, and like part of earthbending is typically that you have to be sort of connected to the earth. But if you're bending into the earth that you're on, like it doesn't make a ton of sense because you've suddenly lost your connection to the earth because you're removing it, like your platform from the earth, if that makes any sense. I answered it on like YouTube one time before, and I felt like I had a good explanation of it. It's a really hard one to kind of picture in your head, but it's something about like when you actually imagine like the forces involved. I think the way I said it was like, well, and say Boomy, he lifts up that giant chunk of rock against Aang. He's still lifting it. Like when he goes to lift it up, he's acting like he's basically doing weightlifting. Like he's struggling to lift up that giant hunk of rock. So even though his connection to the earth is this kind of invisible energy chi link, it's still applying like a physical force into the ground of like the earth, which he's not physically attached to. And I think that helps to explain stuff. That they try to be consistent in that sense, and that earthbenders can do some bending while not linked into the ground, but not everything. And there's just a lot of technical aspects there. I'd actually like to know if there was ever like a fight scene in Avatar where the writers had something like really weird happen and Mike and Brian went like, that's not how bending works. I'd like to know if they have like rules in mind for what just can't happen. Like I'm guessing they have some sort of like kind of power level thing of like normal firebenders can only go this far and stuff like that. But either way, it's always fun to discuss the different bending techniques, and this diagram was a cool way to kind of get into that. But yeah, it's pretty accurate outside of like one or two kind of odd choices. And I think a lot of it does ultimately come down to, I guess the Bonte tribe spiritual technique is maybe a little obscure. Not everyone will be aware of it. They've never confirmed a spiritual technique for Earth, and they've never confirmed a rare bloodline ability for Air, even though I think everyone wants it to be sound bending. And I think that's obviously the thing of like, if you're going to reveal something new in a new series, that's probably what you should do, is finally reveal the super rare technique for airbending as being something like that. That would be really, really cool to see, to just kind of complete the set on a lot of these bending techniques. But yeah, that's that. And then these things are fun. Like I hope they do kind of more diagrams like that. I'd rather these than some of their weird like questions that have like really weird answers. Like what was the thing they posted the other day on the Avatar YouTube page? It was like, what's the biggest mystery in Avatar? And they had like 4 really interesting answers, and they just randomly put as like the 5th potential answer, like, did Jet really die? And I placed my vote for one of the things, and I was like, wait, what? How did the Jet actually die win the vote? And it's just this example of like my fandom is not the same as most of the rest of the fandom. It's never been made sort of more clear than in that moment that like people still have trouble with did Jet die or not, whereas like for us it's like it Toph says he's lying, like it's pretty clear. So yeah, that's that. But yeah, like I said, we're still waiting for a lot of news here. Comic news, Suki Alone preview pages, like I said earlier, a lot of pictures for things that like stuff that was announced with no imagery associated with it. We're still waiting for like the cover for the Free Comic Book Day book, next Korra comic, what's next for Avatar comics, these new novels if they're ever going to announce them. But we are building up to San Diego Comic-Con at home, which is happening at the usual Comic-Con time slot of like end of July. I've already seen the Dragon Prince on social media announced that they would be having a panel. They've already sort of teased that, so I guess we need to be on the lookout in the coming weeks for, because I guess they'll announce it in around a month beforehand. So the next few weeks are going to be pretty interesting as we move into the podcast coming out, the official podcast coming out, the hype up for potentially an Avatar panel at Comic-Con, which would be the ideal place to reveal it. Because I believe after the last podcast, we had a pretty long discussion about like the timing of Korra's announcement, and we kind of figured out that it was like 18 months or something like that before the series came out that like we properly knew about it. So like close-ish to 2 years before Korra came out, we had visuals to go with it, and we kind of knew the gist of like, you know, it's going to involve Aang San and Tenzin and so on. So I'm hoping that they do something like that at Comic-Con this year, and we get our early concept art look at whatever the first thing they're doing is. And I suppose, Greg, as we're building up to this, and they have an official podcast now announced, and merchandise is beginning to really sort of ramp up, do you think something is going to happen at Comic-Con? Do you think they'll have a panel and reveal the first proper Avatar Studios news since the announcement?
I don't know. It still feels kind of early to me for them to do it right now, at least at this one that's coming up, you know, really, really soon. It doesn't seem like there's been quite enough time. I mean, I don't know. I could see them maybe mention it, but I don't think there's enough for them to have like, you know, their own panel or even to sort of like join in on one, which is what they've done in the past as of late.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I think the timing works out where if it goes like other shows, it should be probably yes, and just from the sake of like keeping people informed, it would be a good idea to have some form of an update.
Yeah.
But I do think probably one of the worst things they could do is have a panel, have Mike and Brian there, and they don't mention anything. Like basically they do the panel they've done like every year for the last like 4 or 5 years, where we sort of get interested every year, and it's absolutely nothing. Now, now if they announce an official Avatar Studios panel, we know it's sort of on. If it's just another Dark Horse panel that happens to involve other people, probably not really a place to get excited. But theoretically, Dark Horse might actually have some announcements to make this time out. And if they do a publishing panel with Abrams Books don't really have a lot coming up that wouldn't be like a new book. So even that like could be something interesting, because it'd be cool to get a massive announcement of like new books and information about other stuff. Sort of like tends to happen for like a Star Wars at conventions like this. It'd be nice to get our first wave of like Avatar Studios full Avatar, you know, expanded universe, where like we know about the big projects and the smaller projects. It's really what we need right now, because I've definitely noticed that like a lot of the hype within the fandom has sort of, you know, fallen away because there really hasn't been a follow-up to the Avatar Studios announcement, and we knew this was going to be the case. Like I think we all said it, and that, you know, this is great and all, but we are not going to hear anything for like 6 months to a year, and that's exactly what's happening.
Yep.
So hopefully a lot of this stuff comes together, and you know, you can tell like I wasn't expecting to do another podcast for probably like another week or two, but actually within like 2-3 weeks enough news built up to where we actually needed to kind of do a podcast here to discuss the official podcast announcement. All these listings and information is starting to come out, so we're building up to stuff. Just a little bit more waiting, I guess. So yeah, that's been Avatar Online Podcast, episode 229. It's been myself and Greg. Thanks for listening, and bye.
Bye-bye.